Yeah, chisu nyingko chisu kumde. Hello. Nyingko chisu de chia chigorwa leche drea chigorwa nyingko nguto chia leche chigorwa de call hai meti insta analogy system bal keso ngoma chisu lepati chiku ngula ko de te pitsun sha de te chik drea chigwa o de call hai me tilata insa.
And so I'm checking in to see where you are on your analogies. Hopefully you're ready to present your analogy in the afternoon. If you're not, then make sure you take some time before the afternoon to finish those.
Ta chitsugi nyingko jabla ya keche dela dalone matam chigu yorwa chitsugi ti ani tati chayo periwa chigi yes ke ti tati chama bai na ani nyingko kin zenta maso ngola ya chisu tangchi tati chawa chiro chis.
And then the other check-in is on your presentations for your students on the topics that you chose.
Ta yang shede chi karila tagu sena chisu la ya zenta chigwa chi yorwa o dela ya yang ko kawachila leyo na te tainsa.
Okay, all right.
So you should have your information gathering done and be making
I get it
your
wrong every time.
student objectives
you.
and hopefully started some of what you'll be presenting.
Ta chitsula
Meditation
chia
morning.
ye jucha kari opade sama khudruchi cha che ane kasugre da lop thila ya titpi kas mugi kanaro chi me ta ane the riwa chong yo pai bai na ta riwa chi la ya ane chechu ya jucha kha chi dus nyam ta druchi de te kala kansa ta du chi yo pirwa chi yes.
If you need help and you haven't been able to find the resources that you need, or you're having trouble making your student objectives, come to see us. We can help you.
Ta chitsula ya jucha kha chi mara ba do ta ya chi lom sengi mugi choro al hotul ndiran hotuk mugi sigdwa hotuk mugi ta tit stambal hotel kandaru chi mugi zeng yo me la sobati kola ya entando kange thig yo pai bana ane ya phero chis kela gi dus ropa nangos.
That is true whenever, but better today than tomorrow.
Ta katim bana demba imba kare sena ta sanjali tirane gusu sena ya ko yore tirane china ya ko yores.
So today, we're going to be going through the assignment that you did yesterday, the paper, and we'll do the second paper article. So if you can, go ahead and pull those out.
Ta tirane bana ga su kesan che su twite chi sha ju ge shimjik zong yi ge chi to wa shijik zong yi ga ni ba ti ko la twite chi ge yes.
This second article was written much later than the first one and looks at the amygdala more directly.
Ta tanda ge somi ge ni ba de bana kesan che su ge ta wa ge somi tele ta chis chongate de bet chis chongate na imba ka shila dege ga su khamtsu le shula ya shaja ta ge yores.
Jillian will be leading you in this exercise again.
Ta tanda ge jile la ge tanda ge de mutu nang res.
Tashlek. Thank you for your patience while I try to get organized.
De la ya tade ji kapsu che su zogam na tu chis.
As you know, the Emory students have meditation every morning, and I've been fortunate to join them.
Da tanda emergo hoptu so la ya de gom titrina gora shopa antistamba ngala phan ju chi ku kop chong so te pe go chong so.
And I've been lucky that Tashi has been coming over in the mornings to help set us up with the Muse headsets.
Da tanda ge de ge tasla bolo yo ko pha yong de tanda de asu ga letsa ga lor chen je gi tu chi de pha la go ko ya ta tu nagadus.
So just out of curiosity, I'd like to see what my brain waves look like while I am attempting to meditate.
This tambala ya ane gonja pickups ngarang ga letsa ga lor ti kana do chi yo bai na ne tu tani tu chi sons.
So it's a combination of things I'm very interested and passionate about, and so I'm really looking forward to seeing what that data looks like.
This tambala chirgi bana tila ya tige ritila sukur wata tuno yo pata tige thene ne ngarang ga letsa ga lor ga trang thu ti kana do chi na sa tila ya ta riwa do chi de yes.
And when I get some pretty pictures, I'll be sure to show you.
Aha, that they let's say a lot of David, Tonto David, remove Masonani, you do Chombaina, Tangos.
But it didn't leave much time for me to have breakfast, and I left my computer. And anyway, thank you for your patience.
Aha, Taneda, Titsawatan, Kalasayatan, Lola, Tadiciala, Sopa Gatlichita, Chomasons, Nestabala, Zogon, Tuchis.
So did you have a chance to think a little bit more about that exercise we were working on?
Aha, that Andagi Johnson Chidri or Wakasanti, Corla, these things are put with Johnson Esa.
Or did you just fold it up and put it away and didn't think about it again after you left here?
Aha, the Johnson Yamanache to the Tanda, the Casa.
That one, right?
Each I think a car jabchi, Chunima thought in the chief base.
Which one? The first one you thought about it? Okay, tell me what you thought.
Tambute nine Songdus and Charanga Kare nine base.
So I do want us to go through some more. We're going to continue. So this is 2 articles. Remember, we talked about one from 1999 and then another one from about 20 years later.
Aha, Chine Casa, Guchkogulo Lares, Jambati Bana, Lunishil Haskijila Chijures.
I was looking for my copy, but I don't seem to have it, but it's fine. If you remember, we're looking at whether something interesting or emotionally arousing creates better memories than something that is neutral.
Aha, that and a Kisanga Taitica system, Laya, Taitica Tayoresena, Natsu, Samuel Chitanyo Imbagi, Tonton Lika Lirwa. Elenga Samuel Loya Tani Yan Samboton Sanyon to shoot Tapul on Yerwa, Samuel to shoot Tapul on Yeti, Elenga like Tramba Tambuzu Pala Tayores.
And remind me of the last observation we made. So we were looking at this table, and we were comparing the numbers. What was the observation that we made?
The Kesan Bananga Sugi Dra Simbaga Gala Yesagara, Dela Yataba, Instra Simbaga Gala Yuchugi, Dishtua, Rimuchtua, Telate, the thing as to take on the Kandaruch Tonsons.
Tanda di didra rimi di nalo interesting jida tambo dewala ne ko gaja de nyonyo resha jela ne ko yangar dunda shi jela yangar di ngonzin chede sambal de mar doshas interesting di
Tambo Maudes, the Naman Rochas.
Lego Chobia Madamanda. Yangar Tunda Shiza. Tunda Shi Chile Katante?
Did trust Burger Galashtua.
Yeah. Okay.
He's saying that it increased for interest. The measurement increased.
Yeah, that's true. So we're just making observations about the data. And if it's aversive or pleasant, the interest or attention, they ask you to rate your interest or attention, and it's definitely higher when there's an emotionally pleasant or an emotionally aversive stimulus. It's also high for interest if it's an interesting image, but not high for neutral. So that's a reasonable observation.
Chiganawa to Tinado in Baina, Nico Seja, Telatoyo Patan, the Takarilla Tenatoyo resistant Balaya, Pernirwa, Kutanyom Gate, Tinataba in Banasra, this time Balaya, and Tanda de la interest like you or could Noa to Sugumedo, the Tinado Lataba in Bana, and Kugi Seja Gatan to this Tuadus.
So you'll notice on the worksheet that we prepared, question 3 or item 3 asks, what questions do you have about the data?
that draw somebody kalana trying to college hola draw use to shadows.
So as instructors, we don't assume that the students understand everything that's presented.
So built
into the exercise is an opportunity to get help.
That day system and jelly jeko data nyam tana chishabate system balaya ropa guna ropa
So if something is looking confusing, you don't understand what it represents, this is the opportunity when you work with your group to identify any questions or problems that you might have.
That is the Kasakaresena Yaching Gunyo Bodo, Hamaquado, Tenado, Paimbaina, and a Chitsugita, Rukagan, two Stavi cups, Gumaskado, Kalakapotenado, Yopana, they can do get Truata, cook up the race.
So just a reminder that when you're teaching your science classes, being didactic and presenting information is good, but also giving your students an opportunity to let you know what questions they have is really informative.
That is Tabala, that the retrieve capsule, Choronge Palaya, Loptulaya, Chichetricia, the Tashirgi, Bandol certificate of Yagoris, the Telecage Chilaya, the Loptukanane, Chitrakari Meta, Chitopakariume, or Tenado Layati, and Eco, Chashike Chamuchagores.
So, in your debate tradition, you're practicing and you're talking through some ideas, and that gives you an opportunity to identify more things and to make it better the next time.
That is Roland Chibicups, Rossopasupicups, Chupati, Palaya, Netuatan Lange, Tenaduchian Stambalaya, Tigi, Parotala Karachungoresena, and Choran Yarjin Duagukuchitongiores, Tapas and Shaggy. Lenjar Tantra Chiro, Tistabalaya, Nejema Charaya Stambalaya, Nisopasanya Omali Yardwag in Itan Chagures.
And these academic papers that we look at when they're published, they're written by experts.
And
sometimes they skip steps on you.
This Samsalaya, this Tabalet Samsalai Kosugi Trivi Kapsuchia, Kumba Kashichi, Koparo Nichonja Jagagoris.
So it's always a good idea to check in.
This Tambalaya, and hope to kind of Chintu Manduti, and Eco Toshia Kitchemuris.
So at this point, I'll ask you, what questions do you have about these data?
That under the ring is Chesola Stanton de la Tempe Chesola Chokar Ayos. Yeah. Here's a question.
Yes. Very good. Calden asked the same thing yesterday. So emotional arousal is how, do you need to translate the question? Or you can do it?
You understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
So emotional arousal is about how much it feels. How do you feel? How is your, that feeling, right? So the how much do you feel activated by it? And then the valence is the strength. So, or the importance of it. So how much you like it. So as you can see, the lowest score is for aversive because you don't like it. It's a high emotion, so a high number, but you don't enjoy it. You don't want it a lot. You don't want it around.
Emotional arousal, emotional balance ledge to that tin shaggy capercar system balaya, emotional arousal society in Banangasuge, Samuel Salon Tirwa, Salon Ratoko, Kasuchi Sigidu Satirwa. There is that team by na Taco Shuchilo Turata, Katsuchi Tormasu Shuchilo Teres. That de la valence, data valence, and Shintagar and Tanda Ulakuna Duquata, de la and Tanda Ukosana do the rental system balaya, the Samuel rental system balaya, and Tinda do Samuel Jutela, Chana Katsuchi Gagadu Sach Gorwa, Gamma Gagini Tanchgorwa, rental system balanga, so Gamma Gagatin data, and Tanchi Shagarwa, or Tisseguris, the Pisha Shapa and Bana aversive system balaya, Natuala Sopa Mago, Samuel Bana Tadas. khu ge trangati balance la ya ma ta ne gang la ya ane tanda ren thang ti la ya trangati ta pai ban aversive system ba la ya dig the nyo de tan sgor da ro ka the nyo dina ta pai bai na ka the nyo ge trangka tampu ta nyo ti la ta bi kap se ane samyon ti selong la ya trangka thua do wa ane ti o la ya samyon ga ren thang se ti la ya trangka ma do wa tis ta ba la ya nga so chi thua la so pa ge samyon ti la nga so ga gre ne se ga ga ma ro ti mena sam gu ro wa tis ta ba la ya ti ni ge kheperti tu stress.
Okay. So this study is looking at how you respond to images that have different types of emotional arousal.
That diga ko ge shimjing de karil chi ore system balaya ani kasugrta samyong tan ravi salong mando yo ki mando yo paper la ta vi kapsa ani chorla yo ko kandos le du search gorwa hotel ta se ji ji res.
And this is an opportunity to look at this sort of idea or this hypothesis in humans.
That diga la na ga su dire do ge ani ko ge kasugrta choices to gore ta te la ya ne drum mi na na ne tang kan do chung du se te ta ge ku kap res.
So the assumption in this is that the emotionally significant images are activating the amygdala.
That diga na ne ko choices chi kar res system la ya ani kasugrta nga chu samyong ge thendi selong chiwa tang dem bi par bai na ro nga chu samyong ti selong chi ti par bai na ni ti tang de ro ge ta chi lepan na chawa de te nga su khamsulation na chi du se te res.
And part of that assumption that the amygdala is activated needs to be confirmed.
That diga na ne ani ko de la ten de tanga su khamsulation ti selong chi du se chi gorwa selong chi du se ge jopan de nga su ge taksi chi de tang tempe chi gu res.
So they have also including an imaging part of the experiment.
That de me se ko taksi de na la ya ani nga su ge le pa per la ya yo ra per la ya gi chashi chi yan du snat le chu sha yo res.
So the PET data, or that you see referred to here, that is what's going to show what the brain activity looks like.
This one?
Yeah, so they mentioned in the description that it was PET that we used, and so the next page we're going to look at the PET data.
Toa shiba ge je tere doa de la ya ne rimuge tanda nga su ta se te rimuge jema te la ya ne nga su ge lepa ge nang ge ta chi pa ja chu chi gorwa o te ge ne tang thu res.
There was another question before. Yes.
Nye tuwa din tanji di dina remote da dina la angi tapena emotional arousal and 4.2 down plus minus nga le do jesu xie xia de ko zo par din tuwa tan bi ka su ji ni ju pa do thang ga ge la ne din de si re dang di angi di xi cha da din mang bo le do di xie xia de ji ni ju pa do re da kan de rest ni di dan da di wall ji do yang skin contact response le di wall heart rate change la de ya minus le do di kare yin me dang yang dan da di wall bracket na la da kha xie da heart rate change la de na change bpm la di kare yin me dang yang tama 4 week recognition la de na bracket na d do de so kare chen da yin me de chi song lo chi lai
Yes, the numbers one on this table, the table one, when we look at the tables, the numbers,
Yes.
what are the basis for these numbers? Is like rated from 0 to 10, or what's the range? How this is best? What is this based on? These numbers,
Okay.
these readings.
Yeah.
For instance, like we see 4.2, but over here we see like minus 2.9, and then we see like plus minus 0.5. What does
Yes.
all this mean? And also like in the bracket after some of these categories like heart rate, we see the data BPM, and then for the recognition we see another
Yes.
thing that in the bracket, what all this
Okay.
represents.
Okay, very good, very good. So this is an opportunity to go through. So if we were doing this in class, you'd also have the full paper, the access to the full paper as well. So you could go through and look line by line, and you're welcome to do that. So this is the abstract, but the PDF of the paper should accompany this so you can kind of check as well.
Tanda de bana keti zindan andu strip bana tanda ngasu de la ya ane ko ga tangthu de temba ton nyam to tanda ge tepchi karsa chomi chi garo chomi tele nyam to temba bana ne ko ga ta de na ne kare kare imba tele sha sha ta yo resta tanda de la ya ane karsa the PDF na yo pi ge chomi chi garo de dus yes tanda de la ya de la ten sha ju de do ko ge ta ning ton chi garo te ten sha yes.
But what I can tell you, and I don't remember right now if it's a scale of 1 to 5, but I think it is for the arousal, valence, and attention. I think that's the scale. And so it's showing the mean and standard deviation of the independent rating from each participant in the study.
Tanda de peche tanda tampo sim chi warwa ngaso ge salon ta tene tanda ge karsarin thang senare ti go tela interest attention sa to ishe to ga ti ge kurang ga tangka je ti peche dusta bai bai na sine nga parte interest ra ane karsa ti ge jalo ga te la ya ane ko ge non to chi to than to chi ti go la chi to ga ti ka system bala ya ta ko standard deviation se ro ta ngaso ge chedeng ge heba sa chi ro ta mi re system bala ya jenda ta cheper ka din ro jin do sa ge ju ko ge cha sig ro ta chi ro ti ge na ne o ti chomba chi ge yores.
And for the delta BPM for heart rate change, that is the change in beats per minute.
Handa tanda de jela ya ngaso ge ning ge phardang sa ti ge na na ko ge kutak na na ya chitu adikar songore system bala ya ne kamare re na la ya ning ge phardang la ya jira ka chu chidu sa ti songores.
And I'm not sure why they're negative, because it appears that in each case the heart rate goes down from baseline.
Handa tanda de la ya ko ge dogma tem ba te chi chi pa na ne tang su su kap se ne ning ge phardang te mara cha ge yo patang gores.
And then the D prime is for 4-week recognition. That is a statistical representation.
Handa tanda de jela thama tela ya ko ngwinjin sa to ga thama tela ti na la ya dig ka sa to ga ti ka songore se na ane tanda da ngwinjin tan dewe ge ne nga su ge chas ge chonta chi res.
But what's really important for this figure or this table is not what each number means, but how it compares to the others of the same, of the different categories.
Tanda de la ya remove de na la ya tangka mampu chitan cha ya ro tangka mampu chitan ba de na ne ane chi karsa tangka susu ge kari chongu yore sa ti ke chemu mares ro tangka susu ti ane netak mando la dursta bala kheper karin du sa ti ke chemu res.
Oh, this is the other paper, Michael. I'm not ready for this one yet. You can put back the other one. All right. So for the purposes of the exercise, these are good questions. And usually when I teach this, we spend some more time on it. So we spend a whole day or two, and there's no translation. So we definitely have more time. And we can go through and identify what the learning issues are and clear them up.
Handa shirgen bana de traffic kapse ko kachisola ma ta ji kejir la mabu kapse bana ko chiso ma ta de ta na la kare kare yu me ishi discussion bet ka tin sabu chit kios.
But for the purposes of this, we're just comparing them. It's the comparison that's the most important.
Handa tanda de kapse ko dress goro ati kechem buyens.
Okay. So if you look at number 5, we move over to number 5, you'll see that the question here asks, what are the most important findings in this behavioral data?
Ta tanda dirwa tanda de tro nga te la ta ba bana nga su ge shicho tang de bi tang tu ro shicho tang de bi tang tu de na ne ko ni tang ke shi ka res.
Okay. And we discussed this yesterday. We discussed the comparisons that you really need to be able to compare between emotional and interesting in order to figure out if it's the emotional that's having the effect.
ta de nga su khesa chik ta yores ta nga su chi semnyo tan den ba ta ya na chi yan sense gro ta interesting yan sem bu ba te das ta bala ya ane nga su la ya tangka ti durons ta bala ya ane ka semnyo tan den ba wa oti ki tangka ti chu yo pa ti khesa nga su dur yores.
But I bring your attention to the behavioral data because what that means is now we're transitioning to a different type of data.
ta tanda de je la ya nga su ge ta semnyo sem ti mai ba che ta shisho tang de ge tang thu ta ge yores tis tam bala ya nga su ya tang thu ge man do chi la ta ge yores.
Okay, so the next opportunity for you to work in your groups, and I am going to ask you to do that, is to consider the brain imaging data. So the PET data is about the pictures that they took of the brain and the activity changes that they could see.
ta tanda de che su de la taro che sta nga su ge le pa ge per je chu ge tang thu chi go ro wa de yen sta nga su ge le pa ge per je de te per je ba la te de ta ko ge per te la te de ta ane tang thu te lan sha yores ta te kap sa ane ko la ya khepar kan du man du te la taro che.
So these papers, these academic articles aren't written for teaching. They're written for sharing information between scientists.
ta tanda de do ge shimji ko chong de ba na thon sen thya ge chet ta sha ju tin da mares ku karela da ba na chari pa khu su paro la ya ane ni su sawa tin da do peri che ge chet ta sha ju res.
So they only show the significant and important findings.
ta khu su ge de na la kare ta yore se sta ba la ya ani ke chembo im ba la ya nenga im bi ge ani chi nyeton tin da yoro ti kuna somba chi sha yores.
So they compare the regions of interest and they only show us what is actually significant or has some value.
ta da de kap sang asula tu no yo pe gi ti na ne ane ko kar su gore ta chi chep ngi chen yo pas go da chep kan sa yo pe gi ane khut ti tak tan sha yores.
In fact, the table title is about maximal correlation, like what has the most correlation in everything that they looked at. They're only reporting the most correlation.
da de la nga su tang thu de la ta pa im ba na ko tang thu su ga rimu ka khasang la ta pa im ba na khasang na la ya be te correlations na twinde chi shu yu pa ka re se ge twinde chi shu se ge tin du de sha dwas.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask you to look at these data. You can see left amygdala, right amygdala, anywhere there's the L or the R, it's left and right. And then these are the brain locations where they saw the most strong relationships.
da de la ta pa im ba na ro da de ta ba na de na ne nga su L ta R se te L se te ta yun chi R te iris da de la nga su calculation ta su ta mala so pa khach do da data ka system bala ya da di chi bi kap se ane ka su gore ta selon shi chi shu yo bi ge le pi sa ko de ta res.
And then a quick point, the R value, this column with 0.83, 0.80, this column is the correlation measurement. That is to say how well related it is. So the higher that number, the greater the correlation.
da de la R se ge ko ge tang thang do R ti ge ka song gore system bala nga su tin de ge tang thang chong go res. Tunde ke tang te chom be kap su ku ge tang ka te ka su che ba yo pa ba na tin ge pa lo la ya tunde shu che yo pa song go res.
And the p-value is a statistical measurement of significance, and a p-value of 0.01 or 0.05 are considered to be highly significant.
da de na ne ya p value se sto te yo ko cha sig ga ne tang ki ba kan shi la ne ku ta ke chi ga na significance ko ta la ya ko ke tham ka ra me se ko da chep chi chong ka su chi me ti chom ba chi yo res ta ti ka su ge tang thang la ta ba na ku ka sa record sa la ko chi ta record sa la ko nga ku ge ku ge nang ton ti ka su ga ta te chep chi su ko chi yo pa tong go res.
And you will see that they don't have any that are not significant. So they didn't list anything that isn't significant.
da de la ya ko tang thang ta ba na ya cha chembu me pi ge tang thang jen da min duas.
Okay. The other quick thing is the very first set of 3 numbers in X, Y, and Z, those are the coordinates for where you can find it in the brain.
tanda de ro tanda de la ya chisu ge tampo de la ta bai ma tam kathi tampo sum kana la ya do tanga te ta ka re system bala ya re ngasu gu chongi sum deng ge ngola ton system bala ya ani x to y da 0 ro ko ge ta data system bala te ge kar sena ani ngasu ta bi kap sta ni ko la ta ge me ro ta lepa na ta bi ka sa lepa ge ni ko la ta ge me ge ni ti chong yo re tanga te zu ga.
So you don't need to focus on that too much, but what you should be looking at is the structure, the R value, and moving over to the next set of questions, work in your groups to do 6 and look at just right up until the next bold one. So in your groups, you're going to answer the questions right up to here.
Ngasugi XYZ se such dua kusugi tela ya tuna chigu mares tangka tizu tuna machis tude ane lepa ga chashi kanta ne shenda go ola ya tangka khasu dua tizu lo tuna chirochis ta tela ya tashen ne tege jalwa la ya tuwa nyin dua wa tukpa chita ne tege ola ya chi dua tege ola ya yigi nakpu chembu tu shashi dua tege champorte ane tude chi tarochis yigi nakpu chembu tu jute shenda sawa chirish tege gantela tarochis.
Okay, 5 minutes. 5 minutes, talk with your group and answer the question.
Kamera ngagran la ya ne tudu chiro chesa.
Oh no.
I think you have it on your computer.
It's buried in something because the last time I used this was years ago. Right, but this one I definitely used more recently.
That one I have up.
Yeah.
As you saw, but the other one I couldn't find.
Yeah, no, and I was searching for it. It's on here somewhere, but it's gonna.
I would have thought like with the author name.
Hi, friends. A quick point. As I'm visiting tables, I'm hearing some of the same questions. So I want to clear up a few things so that you can answer number 6 accurately.
Tada dus balaya draw khachi kusons this tabashe gonyo do jithe sares roati tanda tupatan devege chiseshi chigi instance tambalani chisu draw tupala len tak thela pengres.
These data are directly from the academic communication, from the article where scientists are talking to scientists.
Tanda ge tangtho de tanda ge shimji songi ta nane saja ton saju chire shimji songi te ta ko 60% pa nongkola ya ko ge ta te tang thalman chirwa.
And scientists are maybe like monks in debate.
Ta tanda de tabala ya sarupa khusu kana ro yores tabala ne tokse choshin bagi tawatan ro yores.
And if I tell you something, the first thing they want to know is, how do you know that?
That is tabala chi shebata chi res tabala ti imba kandas ha ko so se to the tigres.
So we are in the business of providing evidence, and so this table includes way more information than we need, because it is to make sure that other scientists understand what we did and what we found.
Tada de la ya ane de remove de la taba imbana ngachula goya gi chatin le ane chatin thepa mampu yores wa imba khusu kar sena Tadipa kusu imbana kusu gi kari ching kari chingye sonse gi chatin mampu ching dina dido yores te tabala ya ngachula goya le hawa chi tande dina na yores.
If I was doing this for teaching purposes, I would list all the brain areas that there was activity and ask you to look and find which ones were most active.
Ta kete ngarang de triate ro de tadu chiate ko thomsen triage chete tadu chi yo pai pai na kar chi sare sena ane ko selon ton dembe ga lepa chashi chama ma ko ane tangka titri ane de na ne selon chishu thenyu ga lepa kare rendu lepi saku kangiri du sitwa de sares.
So really what you're looking for here is the comparison between the structures and the condition.
da da de ka su chechu ga ta gwa de ka re system balaya ani lepa ge chashi ta lepa ge chashi te ta drevi ge ta nga su ge chashi se gro ne ta kangi kap se lepa ge chashi te la salon choma chung ge ne ta te la ya ani du gu res.
So the first block is pleasant pictures. These are the areas that were active when the long-term memory was being checked in, right? So you're using your memory here, and these are your memory of pleasant pictures. These are the structures that were active for pleasant pictures.
Da da de ka se tampo de imbai na tampo ta tel chamba sun ro chto tampo de imbai na nga su ge ta jinni ge tambai ba ka shi la ane chi per te no tu su ko no tu la ta bi kap se ane salon kana ro chi me teres.
For aversive pictures, the next category, these are the areas that were active.
Da control tan dem be ge per imbai na ane ti kap se tem be kap se le pi chashi salon chi wa kha te do la ya tu ko ba teres.
So you'll see there are more areas active under aversive stimulus than under pleasant stimulus.
Da da chisu du sta ba imbai na nga su ge per no tu su ko ni jimu tin da te be kable per control ji wa te do te be kap se le pa ge chashi mampu salon ma the go pa de gan thong do was.
And probably the most important driving factor is for interesting pictures, which on the behavioral data had high memory. They had only one area very active.
Da da de ba nga su interest in ta yan sambu go par tena ro chi tam be kap se nga su tang thu tampo ro tang thu tampo rimu tampo na ta ba na ana kola ya thumbo yo res ro imbai na yang tanda de la ta be kap se rimu ni ba de na ta be kap se khu tam be kap se salon cha ga le pe ke cha shi chi ma shi me do was.
Okay, so I'm going to skip through it, but for number 6, what we are asking you is to think about the idea, the hypothesis that we had, that emotion is related to memory, and we're asking you to see which comparisons are going to give you the best support for the hypothesis that the amygdala is involved.
Anganta tandarwa ngasu ge chöshakte kare system balaya ani karsa semyo ta temban dewa yore se korwa semyo ta temban dewa yore se ti la ya shisha pa imbaina tanda digna ni tramthu ti kangi durba imbaina de la jachu yago chigdus ra ta temba tan dewa yo se na gele thama de la ya temba tan dewa yo se de la ya ngasu ge sotama tan dewa yo patire dwa.
So what you should be able to do in your groups is to figure out that the interesting pictures have strong activity in the hippocampus, but the aversive and pleasant also recruit the amygdala.
Da tanda tirwa de kapsang asuge data by imbaida asuge can you repeat it again?
So the interesting pictures,
okay.
it's just the hippocampus that's active,
Okay.
but for the emotional ones, you also see left and right amygdala activity in order to remember it.
Da tanda ko per tabaina per yan sambuge ne tante la yang asuge ta te chuta machibu mashige ke chigmandu simbaina yang asuge ta samyo ta dambi per tidus tam bi kapsurwa ta samye yagdu ni ga yorwa dambi kapsa ne tada chuta mase nga chu khamchu le shuyong ko ge salon chige dus.
So you could say, what if emotionally arousing stimulus was just strongly activating the hippocampus and that's why you remember it? You could make that statement, but the data show that the amygdala is actually heavily involved, and maybe that is what is helping the memory.
Chichi baina cherange direru tanda dilata de tirwa ngasuge the samyoshi taputan dembage tabati baina ngasuge sutamatan do yore se tena do shena dukure simbaina yang ngasuge tangtula taba imbaina ane ngasu samyo taputan dembige kaps ane tembach gorwa tila ya do chini tigna la ya sutamatsa maimba ane khamchule shula kuge salon shi chambute go pade tangtugan teng doas.
So the comparison you should make is that it's only the hippocampus that's active for interesting, but you see the amygdala showing up for the emotional pictures.
Ta tanda de kapsirwa chusuge ti gala ya tua de tan tembe tua dupan de tan tembe lente la ya ane ga suge chiga yan sambu tang per yan sambu ga per tan tembe kapsur wa ane ga su sutama chupure shas wa ne shanda ba na samyo tan tembe ga per tembe kapsur ne sutama chama ba ne khamsi le shule yong du se gi chusuge tate kejete she gu yores ti kapsur.
Okay? So, the next statement, and we're just going to move through it because I want to get to the other paper as well. The next statement, we say, this is the point in the class where we remind our students about the difference between causation and correlation.
Hanta tanda diga nikap de la nga sun zanda na kar chigure se stambala nga chugo jundi ge dewa ta tinde se chigorwa otti gi chapter te ne zanda longo to chigu yores.
So, do you have that distinction between causation and correlation?
Aha chechula ya ane nga ti orwa kasa jundi ta tinde ge dewa chigorwa ti gi chapter te ha ku was chechuga.
Two things can happen at the same time, are related to each other. They can both increase, but one isn't causing the other one.
So that is the difference, right?
That's correlation and causation. So two things can be related, but they're not causing each other.
Tarwa da dire nga su changwe ni ro ta changwe ni nyam tu chong yo pa ba na changwe ni nyam tu chong ka se ko phe wa na nya tu phe ro na nyam tu do chi dewa cham yo pa ba na ro te nga su twinde chi ro ani chi ki jende te ju chi yo pa na te ju di cha go ro.
An example of a correlation that isn't a causation, it's a very silly one. There are high ice cream sales and burglaries. So people steal more when the ice cream sales are highest.
Hanta tanda de la ya nga su ge tinde ba ka shi la ya jundi gi pisam be ge ta pisan chi ores ta te pis khensa bu chi ores ro ani ka res system bala nga su ge ice cream yo ro chati ote chati te zongya gi che thu yo ba ta ro zongya ma ka su ma yo pa na ne nga su ge kama jaga yo ro burglaries na kama jaga ge yang ko che te ma yo res.
So someone could say, oh, ice cream is causing people to steal.
Da yang me khashi ke kar she separe se stambala ya ane chatu yo ice cream ge ne me la ya kama ja ge ju ji du se separes.
But that's not the case. It just happens that the same weather that is ideal for having ice cream is also ideal for people to break into someone's house.
Hanta tigare system ko ju chi yo mares ro tanda ko tanga su chata ice cream sa ya ge ti so yashi ti ro ti ka se ne kama ti zo mi ge khampana ju chi kama jaga ge ti so yashi cha gor ko te khewa ro ju res.
So in the majority of the continental US where they have seasons, during the cold seasons, no one wants to buy ice cream. And they're also not motivated to get up and go and break into someone's house.
Da phila yero ta ko ka so gore tanga su nam ti gi ne tam ti ngon su to pu yo su sa cha kha chi la ane ko ta gung khai ba na nam shi tang mo yo pi kap se yang ko ice cream chhatri te nyugan do ni tunya yo mare te na ji mi janda ka khapana kama ja ko do ni tunya yo mare.
So they're happening at the same time, but they're not actually causing each other.
Da koran tanda ga ne su ni cha nyam te chung yo re sim ba na phan su la ju chi gi yo mare.
So whenever we find something in science, we have to try to figure out whether it's just happening at the same time or if one is causing the other.
Hanta tena do chong be ka tsari ka ne tong kap sta bai ba na tena do chong be kap se ane koran sha chi ti nyap te chong a cham re yang na koran ge chi chi la ju chi gindu se te ta res.
So from this paper that we've just looked at, it tells you there is high amygdala activity when you have good memory.
Hanta tanda de kap se somi de ka tong go re se sta bala ya ke ti chula ya temba ya pu yo pi kap se ta ngoma chong ju ti chi la temba te ya pu yo pi kap se azu khamsi la shu na la ya ni che gu ta che le ti chu chem pu yo pa ti ten yo res.
But there's nothing here that says causing. There's nothing that says the amygdala is what is causing that improvement.
Imba na de la ya ne khamsi la shu ti ge ju chi go res se gi yo ma res. Khamsi la shu ge phajo te la ya ta ti tan de ge temba shu chem pu yo res ge ke che te se gi yo ma res.
So this next study that we look at is the first attempt in humans to make that causative relationship clear.
ta ta de ge je ge zomi chi ta gro wa de na ne nga sun do me ge na la ya tin de do ge ta ko ju tan de vis ko ju de ge do yo pi ge ane ni tan de la ta gres.
Okay? So, what I want you to do now is to look at the next section and come up with ideas for how you could test to make sure that it is the activity in the amygdala that is causing the memory.
Next section means the next paper.
Just here. Yeah,
Okay,
so
okay.
the next paper starts here. Okay, so spend some time in your groups and try to look at what you would do, just like we proposed the experiment the last time. What is the experiment that you could do to see if the amygdala is causing that memory increase?
Kesan tawa nang shere tanda di kapsa nga su kamtsig le shu ge ani temba yaga ta ya ge ju chi go chiorwa o tina do la yan che su imba na ya takshe kanda ru chi dup sare ste gan tu de chis.
Okay, so take some time in your groups.
Ta rukhana na tu de chis.
Ba tingin dewa yo me chitandus.
Ta kamtsig le shu de nga su su de ya jene temba ra ya kat te mala
Somnyong de dewa ra.
samita do yo ba de ka sila su de kamtsig le shu che jene imbara kat te mala. Yeah. He's saying that we can do an experiment. Tanya. He's saying that we can do an experiment to see if amygdala is causing the memory improvement. If you have, typically we have two types of people, like who are really emotional and who are not that emotional.
Yes.
And we can have two groups.
Yes.
And do the same test of remembering pictures and to see if amygdala is helping the memory improvement.
Very good. That's a very good experiment. But that experiment tests emotion, not amygdala.
Ta tanda de karisne chorong ge takshe ge ku ge changgo yago re simba na ya chorong ge takshe changgo tila tene de te nga chu ge samnyo pha takre ma to pe khamchu le shu gan su ta ge mares.
Now remember, we already know that emotional stimulus will increase memory. But we don't know, and we saw that the amygdala was active when that happened.
Ta tanda nga su ge chik kare ha ku re se stambala ya samnyo ton den becomes tremba ti tambu cha ge yo pa nga su ha ku yo res. Ti ma se tinda do cha becomes khamchu le shu ti ya salon chi ge yo pa ha ku yo res.
But what we want to know if it's the amygdala that is doing the effect, not the emotion, but the activity in the amygdala that's doing the effect.
Ta nga su de kapsa kare ha ku ni tu go yo res stambala ya tremba tambu cha ba se go ro ti khamchu la shu ge de ge yo pa. Matopi ane samyong la temba mai barwa samyong go ju chig me pa khamchu la shu ge ju chig yo pa te nga su tone tu yo res kande.
And they do this in animals all the time. In animals, they'll go in and put in an electrode and electrically stimulate amygdala, and then they can see the animals remember the maze or remember which one to pick, and they can test many things in animals when you directly stimulate the amygdala. So they know this from animals.
Samchang galaya tashe de shusham bodu yores rwa samchang galaya tashe de shusham bodu yores ta picha sha paina ne samchang galaya ko ge khamtu le shu ga tele khatu kuranga su go logni gi du salon che ane kuranga ta gonyo match system ba gonyo kalam katina no lan ruya tamba su ya da uta jende tinda no tamba su ya te yong yores.
But for humans, all the information we have is about emotion. We don't have any information about the amygdala specifically. It's all correlated, and we're trying to figure out if it's causing it.
Ta tanda nga chu do mela chamba yamba bana tanda nga chu toksi dubsha ju ta tang thu yo pati samyong tan de ware ma to pe samyok tan dewa res the samyok tan dewa stambala ngasu ti paru la temba tang kamsu la shu paru te la ya twinde chi tu res twinde ta ngasu samba chi res the tanda ngasu gari ta ko res tanda temba tembu chi yo pati kamsu la shu gi ju chi res te ta ko res.
Okay? Yes.
ane dangazo enande zo te tanda ga interesting picture ta yung te sambala hippocampus te salon che gwa o tendi ga kansa te la ta se na te ani tramba te tembu yo yana te la ani amigala te salon chi o marwa interesting picture only so te ta ye tramba te la tanda ga amigala te ani je chi mi so tramba tembu yo la amigala te je chak mi wa te ha ko re sam ko
te salon ko chi yo mara ne
ne so hippocampus te salon che gwa interest picture te te sambala kamsu la so ma to tanda di picture samba tanda chundana data te chindo de la ne interesting picture te te sambala ne hippocampus chiku ma to salon chiku mando o te ta ye kanso te chamba te la ti odi te ta ye chamba tembu chiku yo na amigala salon chi yo marwa so sa amigala je me ya na ya chamba tembu chiku yo ka se je imba ya na amigala me ya na chamba tembu chiku marwa so sa
ta choron ga tokse te dosho ko tokse ro wa
o te cha la so
oh yeah tu son da ma sakachi they have discussed about like the from the second table that we have.
Oh, okay.
Because in the last one, when we show the interesting picture, we
Yes.
we see that the hippocampus is activated, not amygdala.
Right.
In that case, if we see that in that group, if the interesting memory about the interesting picture is stronger and lasts longer, they have a strong memory about that, we can negate the hypothesis.
Yeah, you could.
So
Right.
their plan is that.
Right. So that's exactly right. So your idea is that interesting is enough to create a memory.
Yes,
But what we're
strong
also
memory.
saying is, even if something isn't that interesting, but it is very emotional, whether pleasant or aversive, you also see a strong memory.
That under the kasu chituna kasu gurta yan sambutsa mai barwa yan ko samyong ko tene ko shu chambul honya chim bai bai na ngasu ge temba tembu chi yo pa temba tembu yo pa ngasu thong yo ras.
So our job is to test to see if activating the amygdala can get the same effect.
That anda ngasu ke taksite ka reses tambala ya tat samyong te sama pha yu ro samyong te pha sama pha yu kamchu ga laishu kura shaja kura salon che bai bai na shu chi pa tangre mare te ta gures.
Right? So, any other groups wanted to share what their experiment would be?
Kande send us up.
Hello. Ngasu dere sha tani tanda di takji chi kasliya tanda rokani sera tani tanda amidala la lega che de chuni tani themba recognition kari sigo parten ha ko ya chik jela amidala lega che ma chu ye lo da tani ro ko shawa ka ne ya ko zo themba khandi che jela chigi lo tani selong che che wala tani par chik ba chi jan tani tani kuni kheba khandi sugo de ta ye
Da ore da ko kaya chia se de karse electrode no ta ro electric signal no ta. For them we will have two groups.
Yes.
And we will show the same picture.
Yes.
And for the one of the group, we will let the using electrode to activate the amygdala to see if they have a longer memory.
Yes.
And for the other group, we will use signals to stop the action of amygdala and see if affect the memory. And compare those two.
That's a very good study and almost exactly what they did, but a little more complicated than what they did.
That other kusu ke taksete pe ya godus ruwa ani tanda taksete ya gosu tu tanda dela ya jesum tigna na taksete sa ju chigorwa tele tando nyokta chau chire shas.
바진 로단데 직바 갈렌 라에데 직바체 이네다 템버 레주에기 잘라 떼어 줘라 디 이니 sem용 라에기 시마잉에 땅아주 땅뇽잉에 들여라 어디네 잔자 떼어 거고 있어 sem용데 랑가마라
The setup is pretty much similar to the group of condensed experiment, but we will show them the pictures of neutral emotional arousal.
That's a very important control. The pictures need to be neutral or boring, because if they're interesting, we already know you're going to see stronger memory.
Nahanda tanda de kasu chesu samgote pe apres de gala kasu tangzeng ge chisa ge rokasagura ta tangzeng ne ke chambuchi de la chasons kasu ge tengi ane remote yana chi tangnyom chi tanyam ne nyoptu te la tangu yores ta te la phajo te la chi yan sambundo tenshana te la tan ya kasu ge chi tamba tambu yo ge ne tantin jongu yorwas.
Okay? So what's valuable about using a neutral picture and stimulating the amygdala is that you take the emotion out of it.
Da tanda de kasurwa ngasugi tangnyom gu perchitanya ta ane kamsule shula salon chiwati kapsu ngasu karichi gore sena semyon se ge juchi gorwa ti tanda ge taksig na ne shulola tansha ge ores.
Okay, so remember, we're going back to our basic assumptions. We started with the observation that emotional stimulus improves or increases memory.
Ta tampu ngasugi soso tela tagos ti kasu karichi gore sena semyon ton dembi ge chi tila taba imbaina semyon ton dembi ge cheguti ge ngasugi ane temba ti tan dugure se te tayores tampu tela.
Many animal studies have shown this, but then in 1999, this group showed that emotional pictures can increase memory, and you see high activity in the amygdala when that happens. So the next step is to find out if it's the emotion or the amygdala activity that's causing this effect.
Nahada this tambalata degi ramba jimate kal chagore se tambalaya semyon tigi ta shuchenti tempa tempo chabata sugorwa semyon gi tempa tempo chagachi yorwe kamsule shugi tempa tempo chagachi yore se gita kurani ge paru ge dawat se tires.
So we will show you some images that are boring and then stimulate amygdala at the same time you're seeing the image, and then see if you remember the image.
Tanda kamsule shu tanda dikarsa ngasula ya ane tangnyom ge partiraten tembi kap taranjala ya ane kamsule shu la ya salonche ane tigi jela ya ane jela ya charang ta tangnyom ge parchigora tangnyom to nyotu ge parti jela ya tang dum de te ta tasigures.
So the logic is making sense so far, yes?
Hada ko ge chiga junsang ge dan tang chigorwa te la ya dondong do chi des ko.
Okay? Some important things you can remind your students of as you're doing this. There are different types of studies. You can compare between groups, and you can compare within group.
Hada tanda tasidre ro chi ka se ko che tamando ani siores tate charang ya zna tribi kapslo tu chila tensu tangures ngasuge ko kasugreta dinse mando ani ge paro ge takseti durach gore yamna dinse chikanangi nangi takseti ya durati ores.
So this group proposed to have a group of emotional people and a group of not emotional people.
Handa tanda de la imbana kuchu kar sonson se stambalaya semyon shi chambu yoni ge dinse chitan semyon shi ta mene ge dinse chikse
The comparison would be between groups.
Hada tis tambalaya ko ge taya te kare se stambalaya ane ko dinse mando ani ge parolaya durgu yorwa durate.
But for stimulation, you can have within the same individual, you can have a condition where you stimulate and a condition where you do not stimulate.
Handa ya ngasu kansa chipach kana laya selon se te kapse ngasu kansa chipach kana laya selon chire selon chimare se ge ne tomando ni che yores.
So, for example, if you were one of my participants, I would show you a boring picture and stimulate your amygdala and then see if you remember that picture. Let's say I show you this. And I stimulate the amygdala and then I check to see if you remember it.
Handa dada chora tosi chinju dilaya nzushi chin baina ngaran karchi ores tambalaya ane chola ya per nyoptu chitan nyoptu titan bi kapsirwa ane kamsila shula salonche ane tigi jela ya ane parti chorong ge trang du mundu tayores.
And then another time I show you a different set of pictures, boring, same way, and I don't stimulate, and then I check to see what you remember.
that the jela karechore says tambalaya per nyopto ro per nyopto jenda khasidu stan the tabi kapse khamsi leshula ya salon chi yo mares ro and the jela ya choronge ya per nyopto tizu tangudu mu ta bares.
Now, if the amygdala stimulation is what is improving the memory, you should see an increased memory of images that were presented during stimulation, but a lower number of memory for the images presented with no stimulation.
Tanda the kete roa so comes to leshu ge tamba ya pusugu yo patike juchigu yo paimbaina and choronga takshe de dripping capsule. Tension roa per nyoptu tina tension comes to leshulas have long chebig netan tige cups and ko jela ya tige riti time yaputam bata and per nyoptu tizu tension comes to leshulas halon chime paina nititan devi partita jela ya and tenya chua segura that tembati tus tembu yo meganitan de chagres.
And that is exactly what you see.
That is the netan de non taranja tongoyores.
Okay, so each of these dots represents one of the subjects in the experiment, one of the people in the experiment, each dot. And the blue dots here are with no stimulation, and the red dots are with stimulation.
Salon me bacheroa, salon de maculon de me bache, and cushion de me bacheroa, and marputi cushion yopa, salon yopi capsules.
Okay, what's important here is this change. This is the immediate test, and then this is the 1-day test. So 1 day later. So you want to see how, if you remember it immediately, or if you remember it a day later.
Remove Hazo Tiganalaya, do a tampote, ko Shaja, ko Tenugela Lamson, Trembacana Ruchin do it, and it's a Joticalana Tremba, then you must jelaya, Trembacana Matabares.
There is no significant difference for the immediate test.
That and I could Shajalaya, or Tembata Tigela Lamson, Chijuti Galaya, and Eco Capacita Medus.
If I show you a list of 12 boring things right now, and then I ask you immediately which of these 12 things you saw, you could probably remember quite a lot of them. So there's no real difference between whether we stimulate or don't stimulate in the immediate test, because you can probably remember it right away no matter what.
This Tambala de la Chibi Capsu, Shaja Chibi Capsu, Chapashitamandu, that is Tambalaya, Chistil Game Bana, Ten Sanujila Lamsan Kichitrimbana, Mampuchi, that Tensibar was.
So the first day, when you come back the next day, I show you the same list, and the images that you saw during stimulation are remembered a little bit better than the images that you saw without stimulation. Several things to notice here. Do you notice that overall these are higher in the immediate test than in the 1-day test? So overall, you're going to remember things immediately. Doesn't matter if you stimulate or don't stimulate. And then you go to lunch or tea break and have the rest of the day, and then you come back tomorrow, and I ask you about that same list, and you'll remember some of them. But if there there was amygdala stimulation, you remember more.
Ta ke ti tina do tembi kaps ni kamtsu le shula salon chi yo pai bana ne chor ka mo tang yoris.
So in every case, the memory, a few have not, the memory is increased a little bit with stimulation instead of without.
Ta ta de dina ne chi kha chi ma shi chi ma shi man chi shi te kar do la stambala ya salon chi be kaps ni salon ma chi be kable te tamba de ya dos.
Okay? So this is already really good information. This is, with stimulation, you can remember more boring things than without stimulation.
Handa ta de ko trimdi ti ya puch te yo reste kala baina ani salon yo pai baina ani salon me pikabli salon yo pai baina ani per nyotu tina do la yang ko ma tang yo res.
This is a very important part of the controls.
Handa ta de so la si chi do ga de ga so ge tangjin gi ro kha chi go ro tangjin de ge trupcha ke chen chi res.
14 participants in the study, and they were asked, did you feel the stimulation?
Handa da de ka so kare chi ore se na ani kare ke je ore se tamba dushi shin mi chu shi do ga mi chu shi de la ya ani cherang ge salon che ba de kolon che ba de chor so ai se twa de triores.
In two ways you can think about that. If I stimulate your amygdala, did you feel any buzz or electrical activity? Could you tell that something was happening when the stimulation was going on?
Ta ta de do tri tri de wa ni yo res ro ta ga su ge ji kham chu le shu la ya do sta salon chi wi kap se ne chorang ge ji ga lo do chwa do ta ji ge salon chi yo ga ram ba ti chwa do ji go ro ta ta de lo tang go ro wa de na do ji chor so ai se tri chi yo res de ta chi to.
Did you feel the stimulation? Yes. Did you feel the stimulation? No.
Ta twa de ka res system bala ya salon de chor ma son se tres le.
Not one participant felt the stimulation. Everyone said, no, I did not feel it.
Ta tina ne ko dushi chi chu shi or wa cha ma ge ne na ne chor son se ni chi cho ma res cha ma chor ma son se dus.
Another important thing is, since we are stimulating your amygdala, did you have any emotional experience?
Ta jenda chi karta res system bala nga chu ge che de ka sa kamsu le shu de salon chi or wa kamsu le shu de salon chi yo cha de la ten de chen chorong ge samyang chu chor son se de tra yo res.
So you already know that if you stimulate the motor cortex, you can actually get that part of the body to move.
Ta chi ka ha ku res system bala nga chu go chu le shun ge cha king chen chi du salon chi bai bai na de tan de bi go wang bu cha shi chin go chu tang yo ba che cha ku yo res.
So if I stimulate on this side of the brain, on the motor cortex section that has to do with legs, you would see a leg movement.
Ta ke ti nga ra de ro nga su ge le pa ge de cho sa ge ani go chu le shing na ne nga ra ge kam pa go chu tang de wi ge le pi ge cha shi te la ya salon che bai bai na ti salon che ba ta kam pa go chu tang res.
You notice I did contralateral?
De ko ra nga su do sho ke tang zin chi ge yo ba de ro.
Never forget those little differences, right? So this side and this side, because it's contralateral.
Ta ta de do sho tang zin chi ge ba de tem go res nga su le pa yong gi lo ba le pa yi ge zu po yon ta le pa yong ge zu po yi tang zin chi ge ro.
So if you stimulate the amygdala, it could be possible that you could feel an emotional change.
Chi chi ta nga su kamsu le shi de salon che ba ban chi chi na nga su ge yang ko sam ne de chor se ba res.
And then that would go back to the first paper, which is about emotion.
Ta tena do yim bai bai na ana nga su ge tu de chi ju zo mi tang bu chi yo ti ge ko ti cha ge res.
But what we're investigating is the amygdala, so it's a very important control that you didn't feel any different.
Ta de ka sa nga su ge tang zu ta sa te tan da ka su ge kham chu le shu ge ka yin sta ba la ya ani de la ya salon che wa te chor so ai system la chor ma so se de ti ka se tang zeng ge cha shi trip cha su ro ha cha ke chang bu chi cha yo res.
Question?
amygdala selon cheshwa di amygdala ngazula tumje ni nalo la nigal yorwa
Re re.
쇼 찍을 찍고 치고 솔로스도아
네.
디기 개발수 그 말에
Okay, when you stimulate the amygdala, over here it seems like just only one side or both
Correct.
amygdala?
Yeah, it's a unilateral stimulation and it still works.
Chiche baris, short chiche barisa. Jeba imbanda yonko leka tata chidusa.
But all patients at some point had either left or right.
Ya ko ta nekap ta kap karon chila ya ta ko ge zushi chinye ge ta ina yo ina karon chila ya chi yoresta.
Because
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
Because Keishila asked. When we activate just one and we didn't activate the other one, right? If activate both, will they like other effect or will that be different?
we would have to test that.
Yeah, because everything is just coordinated, right?
Right? Okay, so
Because one part of the brain doesn't work by itself.
it can though. Yeah, so if I stimulate this side, then I can just move one side. And so you can stimulate just one side of a subcortical structure and have the effect. There's no one-sided cognitive effect because it's hard to tell,
Okay.
but you would have a lower effect than if you did both sides.
Okay. Tatanda trade tere ge ngawala ge trana shirwa ta na kusu selon chi ate chashi chi ma shi chi ma to le pag ya chi ma shirwa kap chi le ya chi ma shi chi ma do ta ta ti gi short ge to ate ke ti ni cha che bai bai na man ro chi ngo ba res ta nga su ge le pa ti nyam nyam le kha chi go yorwa istanbul ya te yang kha chi ta nga su tu stanza chi ate wa ta tanda selon chi ate ya chi che bai bai na kampang ku chu tang go yorwa ta this is how we na stanza chi yore kha chi bai na ko 당지제다 카부된다 요레스 임바나 코게 지금 셀리티 마르텐 스탄발라 셰구티 드용 스탄발라야 아니 지금 아니 차치와 당스고라다 강자치와 릴리야 야치체 바나 티스 뉴와니게 네탄데 통그레스.
But this is a beautiful question that brings up an important point about the experimental design.
하다 다데 델라테데 땅가 속에 도시 체험고 땅 드레비게 도와케 쳔부치레게 요레스.
Remember, I've been spending a lot of time saying we've done this in animals, we can't do this in humans.
하다 다데 델라야 치수 템바 속에 바나 데 셈첸 걸라야 도시 데 마부치 요레스. 아니 데 루아메가라야 치트요 마르티 양세 시요아스.
Stimulating the cortex you can do through the skull, because it's right close to the skull, so you can do magnets or you can do stimulation through the skull for cortex.
하다가 가지고 레슨 요로 레슨 라야 셀론 치아티 바나 가지고 고파 주데 들어와 recorded the nguriti kapete jude de chitku yore estigala bana ga zuge leshunti bana ta kaper war kotan la jet thanyo yor wa tistambala ya ane kola salon chati bana ga zuge loinare ane ngarcha yor wa dukhala yor wa tidal sopa gi salon chati ne shaje chitku yores.
But to stimulate the amygdala, which they're showing, if this is skull and this look familiar from Jeremy's presentation, you're here in the amygdala, that requires brain surgery.
Da tanda iro ada ngasugi kamtu leshuti bana gen chisugi gen Jeremy gi tamshig na ne tamsugi yo pa bana ta ku nalo le yor wale pag nalo is tambala ya kamtu leshuti salon chiala ya ani la pa shachi tangu yores.
Do you see how many people, how many authors are on this paper? All these authors on the paper. By the way, this is one of the authors from the 1999 paper. But all of these people are on here.
Da tanda de la ya ko de chis tambala ya somba pa katsu yo me chi tungu do as mabu do as ta ta de na ne chiten so a bit sa ji do ate ne kuch ko gulo jongi chi do ate ti gi somba pu gi ti chi res.
Many of them are neurosurgeons.
Da te na ne ma shishu de na ne somba ma na ne ma shishu ka le na nga su ge ta neurosurgeon says tambala ya wansa sha chu chin ko ta la pa sha chu chin tin res.
Go back up for me, please. You have to crack open the skull to get the electrode in.
ta tanda ge long ni ting asu le pa na ne ma tanda kam su le shu le the la ya ne le pa ge go ko chi go ra go gu ri te kha chi gu yo res.
So some of you have participated in research studies, and earlier this week I saw some of the monastics coming up to get their brain waves. All of those are not invasive, but to go directly into your brain takes a lot of work.
Ta tanda de la ya chi su de la ta she ma bo chi du as tanda chi su ta sung kha shi ke ne ga zo le pa gang ge chi le sa ga lo ri ta ma bo chi du as ti ba na ko ta ga su ge thap ge na ne jam thap res jam bi ge thap res jam ge thap in sta ba la ya le pa sha chi ta ta na ju go te ne chi go yo ma res ta tanda de ba na ta ga su ge thap ge na ne sup ge thap su go wa sup ge thap in sta ba la ya le pa sha chi de ta ma na la ju go yo res. This time bala dinner do che la ya ta ko ka su re ta le ka ma suna ma bo shu gu yo res.
Ethically, you would not get approved to do this experiment. I could not just invite you all to put an electrode in your head. Every single one of these subjects already had electrodes in their head to treat epilepsy.
Ta tirwa ta chitang ge ta sarik te ne ba na sarik te ne ya ko ta shi ga na ne kun chu chi go ro te ke chim bu go ro ta kun chu te ne she ba na mi ge le pa na te le long ne zu te le su chi ki ba na ko khilen chi ga ma re te ge chu chen te te ga ma re sro te che kha bo ngi tu che tu sam de sha ta ngi che le pa na long ne zu ko se te ne che ko yo ma re sta ta da di ba na di ka sa tanda de na la ju shi chi ni ge mi ju shi ne chi do ta ge ro ti cha ma ba na ko su ge le pa na long ne te chu sha yo re long ne te chu ba de tanda epilepsy se na jab ze ro tanda nasa chi chuya ge che to ku su jab ze tra ku su ge le pa na te le nasa te chuya ge che to long ne te ku su le pa na chu sha yo res.
And that's why the electrodes are already in their heads, and some of them have it on the left side and some have on the right.
That is tambala ya kusu de jushi chibi kapsu kusu machi ngo ni tan de la ya ta taksin de na jushi machi kono kusu ga le pig na la ya long ne tu sha yores ne khash ke le pa yi tan khash ke le pa yon la yores.
So a scientific criticism of this article could be that you're not showing an improvement in memory in normal, typical brains, you're showing it in damaged brains.
Ta ta de ge che chum de la ya ya che chu ge ga ja che pai ma na khari cha yore se tambala ya che chu ge ane le pa thang thang ge na la ya temple and juran du gundu mu du se ge te teng mu du le pa le tampo ne sho ji ki ne temple and juran du gundu mu du se te te shi ja shas.
Okay, so for example, this highlighted section here actually describes the patient who had really bad memory. Because of her epilepsy, her memory was already really bad, and she couldn't even remember the doctors who were coming to see her, so her effects are a little bit different.
Nepal ne tan tin de se ja yo resta tista bala ta da de nepal ti pumuti sa ba na mo ge ani temba ti tampu ko pe shu che ro ani tan de tin ye jab ze la tin de ta temba ha cha shu cha de ta sam san la ya su su la ta ge on ga members yin la yang gus ko yo mares.
We can actually find her over here with the lowest memory baseline, right? She had the lowest memory, she had the greatest improvement.
Ta ta de la ya tampu ta ga su ga temba ga baseline se gro ta ga su ga jitri chi ga ro jitri ta ma shu ro ta temba ro ta de ba ga su thon ta do sa ma shu che ba na ko la ya selon chi bi kap se yerjin ro ta ma shu te ru do sa la.
So the impact of this research is really significant. She has poor memory, and with amygdala stimulation, you're able to improve her memory for boring images quite significantly.
Na ta te ga system bala ta shibji de ge ta ku ga nyetan chi gora ta te ku ge kenga chambo imbarwa kene ka so yamba de tangores ta shirge ba na tambo ku tamba ya pu me ni chi la ya ani per nyoptu te ta ani khamsu le shi te la ya salon che ba na ani ku ge tamba che tan do ge se chambo yo parwa tin dus tangores.
So the implications for this kind of research are tremendous for people who have memory deficits.
This tambalaya ane tambalaya choyo nyege mila sombai baina ane shimjing dinado ta ha chang phambu tang ke chambu chagores.
So you could imagine a condition where you have memory problems, but you have a stimulator in your amygdala, and when you really want to remember something, you just stimulate while it's happening, and then you can improve the likelihood that you'll remember.
That under the Niton by banner or Chorange, Lepagnalaya, the Camtulation Alaya, and his helon changing alone, it is by a shadow, and a Katie Charanta. So pickups get in a tonchi tensugu yopa imbana, Nituntin Jones pickups and Nicasocretaco Salonchi by Bana comes to the Salonchi by Bana, the Tambanatis Tambodegora, Tidadoganatonjona.
There are lots of other things that you can pull out of this study, including the ethics of using folks like this, what the improvements could be, what it would look like in normal, but we have to go to tea.
That they gonna like Mapuchilata to Sroy, Kusuga Kanchu, take a Tanzan Canada, Chigi, Meta, the Talayan Pecho, Canada, Chitango, Meganeta, Mapuchila de la Dus, Yemenayata, Sochatonga to Gudus.
But I hope you see how you can use some of the active scientific research to remind about concepts that we already are thinking about and that we have background information from animals.
That other day, system Malaya, Natsu Hakua gets once a Terry Tripton on Amazon Mapuchi or what data Casus, Cheto, and that Mita, Nesocha Jenga, like a drip shajugi, Shimjita, Shimjik, so he did a picture on that and cast Sekata, Captain Town, the cook up today, but the answer to Tensuguris.
This paper actually goes on to identify a potential mechanism outside of the emotional component, but what could be happening with the amygdala and its connection to the hippocampus that might be charging this memory effect.
That under the Somidina method, Kukarchi research, Tambalang, to Samyonti Pasha, the Terra, did a job because come to Leshulaya, and a Kusalonche Batan, Teta, and a tea daily cook under the Sutamalaya, Kudochigora, or Tigi, Jonram till attended the tent and Dagasuka Temba, Yabuch Hagi, Taku Litsu Sigurwa, Litsu Chikolayan Kusuchita, Session on a direct inside a trade or Chitoris Metotolobina.
This exercise doesn't include it, but you could definitely continue to develop it and be able to see the mechanism of that interaction between different brain areas that improves memory.
Tanda kita na layan asuke cikgu deh di nana yo mari simbana tanda kita di loda ta China di Korea tanda asuke kamsile shuta Suta mani ke paru kita dewa latih ni detan dewa ki lika citang ke lisu te latih ni deti ane ngasu ke tembu charge korwa netun chagu yo pati ke lisu te laya ane din ane matu tutana di Korea.
Thank you for letting me take up some of your tea break. When you come back, Michael will talk with you about fear circuitry.
Tata di ane citu social person citus ciken cison secondas ane tanda jelaya ane again Michael lagi wa tanda nenga suge jiktak ke ane dalam cigorwa ti korlayan desi jagres.
And I'm happy to answer any questions at any time.
That try yo paina tarosi singilan jagos.
Okay, thank you.